lasting impacts. I would like to acknowledge that we are all here, we are all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade as stolen people on a stolen land.
Ashe.
Ashe. All right, so I'm setting the tone, yes? Okay. So with this history behind us and in front of me, it is a privilege that cannot be described to be here accepting this honorary degree. When these places were envisioned, they did not have me and those who look like me in mind, and I am here despite that history. And I say thank you first to all who have toiled, been victorious, been made sick, and those who have died making bread out of stone to keep me alive, paving a way to make this possible. I say thank you to those who never made it after entering the doors of no return. I accept this honorary degree and this award for my mother, Lita Campbell, my great-grandmother, Muriel Harris, my grandmother, Violet Maud Harris, better known as Aunt Kitty. The community of women who nurtured me as a young feminist in the Toronto Black Women's Collective, and to the men in my life who work continually to undermine patriarchy. It is important for me in these kinds of gatherings to locate myself as my own history informs my work, my analysis, and the impact I want to have on the spaces I occupy and negotiate. History which is not unique to me, the history of my grandmother and my mother, as the work that I do and the impact I strive to have is inextricably linked to their histories and the histories of other women across this city who catch the first bus and train to low-income wages to support their families. It is my relationship to this collective history that has shaped my commitment to social justice and striving always to create new ways of being in the world. So a little of that history. I grew up with my great-grandmother and grandmother in a rural community in Jamaica. Many of us, some of us in this room know it as Industry Cove. My great-grandmother's husband died, leaving her with 6 children to support. My grandmother, Aunt Kitty, her second, went to work at age 13 years of age to help support the family, never having the opportunity to attend school. She worked in cane fields. She worked cleaning houses, cooking and cleaning classrooms in schools like this. In her work life, she literally and figuratively fought to not have her rights trampled upon. I grew up knowing that I wanted to have half the fighting spirit she had and a clear sense of entitlement to fairness and justice for those around me. My mother, Lita, who left Jamaica when I was 5, joining hundreds of Caribbean women who were enrolled in what was then called the Caribbean Domestic Workers Scheme, now called the Living Caregiver Program. Times haven't really changed that much. To work as domestics here in this city and across this country. When I joined my mother, I heard her stories of struggle against exploitative employers who then and today continue to treat living caregivers as their personal slaves.
Speak it.
My mother had the insight to apply for landed status near the end of her contract behind her employer's back. She was successful, but not before being taken to small claims court by her employer for the price of the plane fare and medical bills he had paid for her travel to Toronto, and at the same time, the cost of steak, meat. Steak he claimed she ate without his authorization. From history, Black people learn never go to court without money. And with history behind my mother, she took money to the courts and was able to pay and make repayment for both the stake and the plain fare. In witnessing these struggles, I made a promise to myself for the line of mothers and grandmothers that I would sign myself up wherever possible to fight and change those things that devalue Black women's lives, low-income people and working people's lives, that produce poverty and shame, rage and illness, hurt and silence, inequality and injustice. I did not attend previous convocations for my undergraduate year and my graduate degree at this university, because York did teach me to rebel against system and institutions. So you're here, yes? But this denied my mother the opportunity to celebrate. So I thank you, Professor Leslie Saunders and supporters, for nominating me for this honorary degree so I could return to this place to right that wrong. I regret that my grandmother, Aunt Kitty, is not here to witness this moment, as I know that this honorary degree of law for her would mean that she could be fiercer. Taking actions against injustice, because now in her analysis, she would tell oppressors that she had a granddaughter with a law degree that could defend her. But I would have to remind her that it really isn't that kind of law. So we are here to mark your graduation and your achievements in the company of peers, educators, family and friends, and those who provided support, so you could arrive here to accept these graduation certificates. And I say collective thank you. To those of you who felt you had minimal support, I say to you, none of us make it, as you heard, alone and or on our own. As just being able to be here was made possible by others who often are unnamed, who advocated to make change and create space for this possible moment. I say thank you, we say thank you to them. President Linton's remarks focused on the anchoring principles that will guide her tenure in this institution. The principles of excellence, access, connectedness, and impact. And I want to pick up on impact as having resonance for me and asking you to think about what is the impact you want to have as you use these degrees that you have just gotten from this institution. You get these degrees at a time of tremendous pressure in the world, which manifests itself in the rise and the unmasking of the right, giving way to Islamophobia, xenophobia, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, the use of the threat of national security by governments as rationalization and justification for the limitation of rights, and large-scale military intervention to so-called keep us and this world safe, and to return us to some romanticized notion of the past when we were all safer and stable. Many of us in this room have lived with instability and insecurity, and that is not a romantic notion, this past for us. We've also seen the doubling down of patriarchy to keep and put women in our place, which is not in the public sphere of leadership. And we have seen our leaders talking about grabbing us in our wherewithal and groping us all about. We leave armed, you leave armed with your degree at a time when your actions and or your inactions will have an impact, because there is no neutrality in not interrupting injustice and inequality. You get these degrees when everything around you would suggest that your work and you work for your individual needs to get your piece of the proverbial pie, and or to get rich or die trying. I compel you to use your knowledge to push against that sentiment, as the stakes are too high for all of us if we fail. In the words of poet Audre Lorde, if we fail, women's blood will congeal on a dead planet. Hence, with your knowledge and the privilege of this degree and these degrees, we must band together to take action, big and small, that will have an impact of creating more equity and justice. It is in your interest to fight for a higher minimum wage. It is in your interest to fight for the organization of work that reduces precarious working conditions.
Yeah.
It is in your interest to fight for a social assistance system that enables people to move out of poverty.
Yes.
It is in your interest to support unions and unionization, because we know that there is a unionization advantage for racialized and women workers.
Yeah.
It is in your interest to push and demand for investment in publicly funded educational system. This is what it can produce.
Yes.
It is in our collective interest to fight against cutting or limiting investment in social programs as a way to reduce taxes on the middle class. It is in our collective interest to have equitable immigration and economic trading policies.
Yep.
Because the lower prices of the clothes we wear are directly linked to the poor working conditions and low pay received by workers in the global south. Violence against women and girls is our interest.
Yes.
Because it says something terrible about the valuing of indigenous women's lives when we have here in this country over 800 recorded murdered and missing indigenous women. This is the population of a small town in Ontario.
Yeah.
This warrants more than government's apology. It requires our collective indignation and action.
Yeah.
The issue of male violence against women and girls is men's concern because it diminishes your humanity.
Yeah.
I thank the educators in this room who inspired us, who gave me access to tools and language to make a case against inequality and for just social change. And who have now given me the privilege of this honorary degree to add to my toolkit for just social change.
Yeah.
As students, we have earned our degree, but years later, we may never remember the readings. We may never remember the references, but you will remember the impact some of our educators have had on us to advance actions for access, accountability, and equality. I take this moment, therefore, to name names. And I ask you to think about the names that you will later call when you remember those who have had impact. I name names of Professor Leslie Saunders, who in that summer Black Writers course gave us that very long reading list. But among that list was the book, The Black Poets. Leslie, you inspired me to see the value of poetry's ability to speak succinctly and for the soul. Leslie, you inspired me to see the value of poetry's ability to speak succinctly and from the soul about my reality, and how poets can paint with words the just world we fight for but cannot see. My friends now know me as a forever pulling out endless quotes from poets, often Neruda, because he spoke of love and justice, and that is what I long for all of us. I call the name of my professor Johanna Stuckey. Johanna gave me bell hooks which I used liberally to speak back to her, and often about what ails us as white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Meg Loxton and Charlene Ganache about women and work. David Trockman, Percy Anderson, Rudy Grant, about the dangers of Caribbean nationalism.
Yeah.
Patrick Taylor, Alan Simmons, about liberation theology, race and migration. Russ Chase, about the role of Caribbean literature in nation building. Livy Vesano, about racism in our public institution that is supposed to be the place of protection, the police services. Himani Banerjee, Atuse Kyoto, and Arnold Idwaru, who gave me interrogation of Frantz Fanon, Marx, and critique of liberal democracy. James Porter, who introduced me to Foucault. And thanks as well to administration staff. I speak the name of one staff, Ursula Kruger. And Ursula may no longer be here, but Ursula was an anchor for me and for many students who needed to navigate the morass of administration and form filling that you have all had to do to arrive here. Thanks for feeding activism and creating space for critical engagement and strident disagreements. You too will have your own names, and I encourage you to affirm those who have had an impact in giving you tools to shape the world you want to live in and leave behind. The women and men who live with indignities of poverty and homelessness, with whom I have worked, and my activism in the Black, women's, and LGBT communities have taught me that movements, work, and organization with a social purpose and actions of resistance for equity require only the commitment of a few who can risk saying no, and the faith to discard notions of all requirements about being practical, as practicality can limit actions for just change. In justice-seeking work, practicality often means compromising and muting our public dissent and disagreements with the status quo for fear of what we might lose. My recommendation is that every day we strive, and we need to strive to live our values with purpose and urgency, no matter how impractical. Every day we need to try and make visible our acts of resistance against oppression and build alliances with communities facing inequality, because our privilege comes at their expense. We need to also be mindful not to separate service provision work from social justice change work, as doing so means committing ourselves to the institutionalism of programs for poverty, homelessness, and violence, and not changing the social conditions which create and give rise to those issues. I believe that no act of resistance, of interrupting oppression is ever wasted. They serve as inspiration to others. They affirm the struggle of others near and far, and they affirm the moral imperative that it is our individual and collective responsibility to work for what is just and right. Thank you to the communities of women, men, and trans folks to whom I am committed and who have worked with me as an ally and to whom I am in alliance. They have survived abuse, they have lived with immeasurable loss, have suffered the indignities of poverty, the stigma of mental illness and substance use, the brutality of racism and homelessness, and the immense loneliness they all bring. They have taught me that some of what we all need the most, compassion, dignity, and recognition of each other's humanity, can be the hardest to find. Thank you to the colleagues and allies I work with, as it is the strength of our collective efforts that will make and sustain just change. I'm near the end. So I accept this award, therefore, with a plea that you see the impact of inequality, that this impact looks like poverty, racism, sexism, homophobia, colonization, to name a few. And that you claim your ability to have meaningful impact by taking individual and collective actions to interrupt inequality. Finally, I believe that to deliver on this, we must rely on ourselves and on each other to be allies in our struggles. Your struggle for justice must be my struggle for justice, because there is no justice in achieving access and equity for some while leaving inequality in the path of others. We may be tired. The leaders we have at the moment in the world makes the task daunting. That's the Jamaican coming out. But we must be relentless and constantly vigilant. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I thank you for this honor. I end with a piece of poetry.
Yes.
A poetry piece from Leon Brand. It's an excerpt. And it is for all those who have gone before us, who have been waiting to see us arrive safely. So this is an excerpt from Blues Spiritual for Mama Preta from No Language is Neutral, honoring Black women, my grandmother, and other women yet to come. And Brand states, on looking at the photograph of Mama Preta, an ex-slave, 115 years old, when her photograph was taken. She waited for her century to turn. She waited until she was 115 years old to take a photograph. To take a photograph and put those eyes in it. She waited until the technique of photography was suitably developed, to make sure that the picture would be clear, to make sure that no crude derogatory type would lose her image, would lose her lines, and most of all her eyes, her hands. She knew the patience of 115 years. She knew that if she had the patience to avoid killing a white man, that I would see this photograph. She waited until it suited her to take this photograph and to put those eyes in it. She took care not to lose the signs, to write in those eyes with her fingers that what her fingers could not scribe, a pact of blood across a century. A decade and more, she knew that it would be me who would find her will, her meticulous account, her eyes. Her days when waiting for this photograph was all that kept her sane. She planned it down to the day, the light, the superfluous photographer, her breasts, her hands, this moment of me turning the leaves of a page, noticing her eyes. Thank you.
I don't know if there is much more to say, but I will say a few words for our
brilliance.
As Dean of York University's Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, I welcome you to this October 2017 convocation.